Hello, everybody. This is Jennifer Matarese, and before I get started with the episode today, I'd just like to take care of the usual housekeeping. For starters, paid requests are now reopened. If you're interested in submitting a disaster request, please double-check the list of requests I most recently posted to the podcast Facebook and Tumblr accounts to make sure your request has not already been made. Also, please look through past episodes to verify I haven't already covered the disaster in question. To submit a request, you can send a donation of $30 or more to the podcast's PayPal at disasterarea@mail.com, on Venmo at Disaster Area Podcast, or on Cash App at Disaster Area Pod. Just add the name of the disaster to the notes on your donation. If you have an idea for an episode subject but you're not sure if it qualifies, feel free to message me and I can approve one way or another. The subject from this particular episode was chosen by Casey, and I'd like to thank them for the request and for the donation. If you'd still like to help support the podcast, you can do so with a one-time donation through PayPal, Venmo, or Cash App, or on a per-episode basis through Patreon at www.patreon.com/disasterareapodcast. A per-episode donation of even as little as $1 an episode can help me do things like pay the rent, keep the lights on, put food in my refrigerator. And so if you do join the Patreon, you will get new episodes ad-free as soon as I record them, rather than waiting until they are released. So if you do become a patron, I would very much appreciate it. You can also follow the podcast on Facebook at Disaster Area Podcast, on Instagram at Disaster Area Pod, and on Tumblr at Disaster Area Podcast. And I still have to get the specific account for Blue Sky into the script, but it's basically a disasteraria.bluesky.com. So it's really easy to find if you want to look it up. Also, please think about rating and reviewing the podcast on Audible, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to the podcast. As always, the sources for each new episode can be found at disasterareapodcast.wordpress.com and in the episode description wherever you might be listening to me. The sources for this episode include a Charleston Post and Courier video entitled Charleston Fire Department's Recovery from Deadly Sofa Superstore Fire, a video from the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation entitled Charleston 9, The Ultimate Sacrifice, and the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST, their report and models on how the fire progressed. I also listened to the first hour of dispatch audio from the Charleston Fire Department's response to the fire. Other sources include several articles from the Post and Courier, the main newspaper in Charleston, which did some incredibly detailed reporting on the fire by writers Ron Machaca, Glenn Smith, and Skylar Kropp for the articles used in this episode. I also sourced from a Newsweek article on the fire as well, a Count on 2 article remembering the fire 17 years later, and a detailed summary of the fire at firerescue1.com. With all of that taken care of, thank you very much for listening, and welcome to Disaster Area. Episode 252, The Charleston Sofa Superstore Fire, June 18th, 2007. 9 deceased. So I've been working on this novel for a while. Well, I've been working on that novel and another novel and another novel and the road trip book. Someone please poke me with a sharp stick to prod me toward finishing them all, I swear. In any event, the one I want to finish most is the one about a woman who keeps an eye out for time travelers at disaster sites, at fires to be specific. The point is to prevent anything from being altered. Things must happen as they are meant to happen. You can observe, you can learn, but you cannot change. Obviously, that can be hard, allowing people to die in a fire right in front of you, over and over and over again. In fact, we have an entire group of people whose job is mostly to make sure that sort of thing does not happen. It can be a dangerous job, but one which a lot of really brave people do willingly for long hours to keep regular people like you and me safe. The danger inherent in firefighting means that injuries and even deaths are something every firefighter needs to worry about when they sign up to do their job. The intensity of the job can turn what might just be an average workplace into a family. Losing one person on the job can be absolutely devastating, not just to the fire department, but to the community at large. Now times that devastation by 9. The Sofa Superstore at 1807 Savannah Highway in Charleston, South Carolina was the sort of building you might expect to see across from an oil change shop and squeezed between a Circle K and a Dunkin' Donuts. That's because it was, or at least the location where it once stood, is now situated in just such a familiar configuration of blatant late-stage capitalism. In 2007, it was sandwiched between a used car lot and a gas station, and was one of 3 locations in a chain around the region. Following that stretch of highway eastward shows one business after another. Nail salons, doctor's offices, car dealerships, with residential neighborhoods just behind either row of strip malls and parking lots. It's one of those roads where, if you live in a slightly larger town, it is not necessarily the main drag, but it's where all of the businesses are, or most of the businesses are. You drive down that road, and if you turn off the road, you end up in residential areas. Following okay, I skipped that sentence. The Sofa Superstore sat on the southern side of the east-west 4-lane highway facing north. So let's say you've just arrived at the Charleston Sofa Superstore to buy a white couch you are going to regret the first time you let a child or a pet anywhere near it. You pull up to 1807 Savannah Highway and drive into the narrow parking lot in front. I say narrow, it's basically, it's the cars facing out towards the highway and then cars facing towards the front of the Superstore. So there's enough room for like a really long truck or fire truck to fit there, but like one. If you're going to try to maneuver other trucks there, it's going to be really difficult, which, is going to be important later on. If you're older, you might remember when this building used to be a Piggly Wiggly, which for those of you outside the US is an actual name for a real grocery store in the South here. You park in one of the regular spots facing the highway, but if you pick up something today, you will be able to pull up into one of the pickup spots just outside the front entrance to load that white couch into your van or truck or whatever else might leave a stain on it before you get home. Or they can deliver it to you. I believe they were delivering things as well. I'm not exactly sure on that, but there is a warehouse in the back, which we're going to get to. Anyway, the facade of the Superstore is nothing fancy. It's like a strip mall vibe looking for the rest of the strip, with a relatively plain storefront and Sofa Superstore on the front in green letters. Now, I'm trying to be very careful with Sofa Superstore because it is a mouthful, and when you are speaking quickly, you can turn it into a bit of a tongue twister, and that actually comes up later as well. Large windows line the front of the building so you can see inside at the store's selection. When you walk inside, you first enter the main showroom, decorated as you'd expect in pieces of furniture set up in their own invisible living rooms and bedrooms. They're all sort of in these little setups together. There are showrooms to both sides, the east showroom to your left and the west to your right. At the rear of the main showroom, toward the left, are offices and cubicles for the staff. In the rear right corner is a holding area where they put furniture that's been chosen that needs to, be taken off the floor. If you're going to come pick it up later, if they're going to deliver it, if you're going to, however you're going to get it out of there, it is now off of the floor. And in between that holding area and the offices is a corridor leading to an area where furniture could be repaired. There is an area, like you go down this corridor and there's a door there that leads into an area that's it would have been open as a loading dock, but they kind of put a roof over it and covered that. And then to the left is this area that is like little rooms that they've added. And a couple of them are like repair areas where you can take, furniture in to be, reupholstered or fixed or whatever needs to happen to them. Through the holding area, if you're able to go through, is the Superstore's loading dock, where employees would usually go out on breaks for a quick smoke. Because a lot of that is covered, but then there is a part that's extended out into the parking lot that just has like a little roof on it. So if it's raining, you're fine. A pair of double doors separate it from the west showroom, and behind both the repair areas and loading dock, you would find the store's warehouse, almost as big as the store itself. As you can imagine, the warehouse contained furniture of all types in boxes or wrapped in plastic, stacked on shelves 5 high. So, I mean, you're talking about like one shelf after another going up with like couches and all of this. It's a big open space, and it's higher up than the showroom, obviously for storage reasons, but square footage wise on the floor, it's about the same size as the main showroom, give or take. Now, built in the 1950s, the Sofa Superstore, see, here we go. Sofa Superstore's main showroom was the only area in the front of the building, about 120 feet from one side to the other and 130 feet from the front of the showroom to the back. So that was the main area right there. And that footage that I'm giving you is about right. Depending on the source, it was giving me different numbers for that. The newspaper articles were giving me different ones from the NIST report. Like it was a little variable, but those numbers are pretty much accurate. And that's going to be about the same for the other measurements that you're hearing from me. A lot of the sources that I was reading were giving me different numbers, but they were all kind of in the general area of the same. After the Sofa Superstore took over the building in 1992, they put on the West showroom as an addition in 1994, adding 60 feet to its width, with the new showroom going back 120 feet. The showroom was constructed the following year, pretty much a duplicate of the showroom on the far side of the store. This gave the Sofa Superstore a good 31,000 square feet of show floor to entice you with all sorts of furniture displays, no matter what your taste might be. Then in 1996, capping off all of that additional construction, the warehouse at the rear went up, with its high roof and square footage about the same as that of the main showroom. This meant the entire building, from the facade all the way to the rear wall of the warehouse, was a good 50,000 square feet or so, give or take. We're talking about all of the footage, the loading dock, the repair shops, all of that. Outside, you have the parking lot out front. You have some paved areas like on the side by the loading dock, and then in the back there of the warehouse, there is a fence between the back of the warehouse and Pebble Road, which is the road behind the Sofa Superstore, which is, so you have Savannah Highway in the north and Pebble Road out back. The Sofa Superstore's fire safety protections included roll-up fire doors for the openings between the main and side showrooms and entranceway between the holding area and the corridor to the warehouse. So there were 7 in total. What it did not include was sprinklers. Now, I do want to say before I get into the sprinklers that these roll down doors, these roll up doors, what they had, they were basically like stuck in position. They're rolled up, and they were in like the areas, the windows, the openings in between the east and west showrooms and the main showroom. And what was keeping them in place were these things called fusible links. Now, fusible links are like little wires or plastic, something along those lines, where they are put in either side to hold it up. And then when the heat comes from a fire, those connections melt and the doors roll down automatically because that obstruction isn't in the way anymore. So the store had those, but it did not have sprinklers. Store owner Herb Goldstein would later tell the Post and Courier that installing the sprinklers would have been expensive and that they hadn't been required in his first furniture store 15 years earlier. So he'd simply not bothered with them, thinking that they were unnecessary. Which, you hear that now, and you know what the subject of this episode is, and it sounds ridiculous. The interview with Herb Goldstein is a little bit frustrating, and there are several reasons for that, but I will get into them later when we get into like the investigation portion of the episode. So, on Monday, June 18th, 2007, it was exactly what you'd expect from a summer day in Charleston, South Carolina. It's hot and muggy to the point at times of being insufferable. The temperature peaked at around 91 degrees Fahrenheit or 32.7 degrees Celsius, but as the afternoon moved toward the evening hours, the humidity jumped up a smidge. One can only imagine that those inside businesses like the Sofa Superstore were perfectly content to stay inside them where the air conditioning would have been running. It must have been just, I mean, I'm sure if you live in South Carolina, you're used to that sort of thing. It's completely normal weather for you, but I'm from Pennsylvania, and when it gets that hot, you feel it. I like feeling it. I like it when it's hot like that, but it can be a little insufferable for people who aren't used to it all the time. At around 7 o'clock that evening, the Sofa Superstore was still open for business, with employees scattered throughout the structure. What happened around them isn't exactly clear, but what is known is that employees at the store who smoked would go out to the loading dock area between the showrooms at the front and the warehouse at the back and smoke there. The loading dock area was open to the north. It was at the front of the warehouse, so it's at the front there, it's facing north, and there was a garbage collection area on the end. Now, I say on the end, in some diagrams it is like at the like western side, like all the way to the left if you come out of the warehouse onto the loading dock, and then in some it's like in the middle of the open space between the loading dock and the showroom. The picture that I saw as part of the NIST demonstration, it shows like a pile right against that covered part of the loading dock on the eastern side of it. So when you would be out on the loading dock, you'd kind of walk out, you'd hang out, you'd smoke there, and then you'd go back in. And that door that you walked out of to get to the loading dock, the exterior loading dock, right outside there was like a pile of like broken furniture. You just sort of put it out there, until it could be gotten rid of. There was also some rubbish from the offices. You're talking about like, printouts and contracts or whatever that things needed to be billing, that sort of thing. And it was piled up out there. And when people go smoke, sometimes you don't really, pay attention to where your butt goes when you're finished with the cigarette. Around 6:30 p.m., several of the repair shop and warehouse employees took a moment before clocking out at the end of their shift to go outside and have a smoke. Now, I say took a moment before they got off of work. They were getting off of work in like 10 minutes, but they were just kind of killing time until then to, you go outside, you smoke a cigarette for a little bit, then you clock out, and then you leave. So they went out there, they're hanging out, they're smoking, they're chatting, and they're not really paying attention, like I said, to where they're throwing their spent cigarettes. It's just kind of, you drop it on the ground, wherever you flick it or, whatever. And they got rid of those. They finished up. They went back in, clocked out. They locked up. And then they headed out not long after. Or at least most of them did. So it shouldn't come as quite a surprise that a little before 7 o'clock, or like the timeline is a little iffy here. There's minutes to spare here or there, but it's about a little bit before or around 7 o'clock, give or take. A call comes into 911 in Charleston from a man who'd been passing by who stated, quote, "I am at the Sofa Superstore on Highway 17. There's a big fire at the back of the warehouse. It's huge." Soon enough, there were more and more calls as people spotted the black smoke rising from the loading dock area. There had also been some calls from the store itself. The first call had been from the passersby, but somebody had called from the store and said, well, we tried to put it out. We had a fire extinguisher and we tried and it's not going out. So there were calls coming in from multiple people. Dispatch passed the news onto the fire department at 7:08 p.m. The first announcement from dispatch called for engines 10 and 11, ladder 5, and battalion 4 to go to 1807 Savannah Highway for a possible fire behind the Sofa Superstore. The person announcing laughs a bit as he stumbles over the words Sofa Superstore. This happened several times in recordings of transmissions from that night. People tripping over the name, you kind of laugh. That's just the normal thing to do. But it's something that you notice later on as things are getting bad, that it's still kind of happening. And it really is an indication that they really don't know how bad things are getting, because they're still kind of laughing about the fact that, Sofa Superstore is a bit of a tongue twister. And if they had more of an idea of what was going on, they wouldn't be laughing at that. They would be getting really frustrated that they cannot say this. And it just is really telling that they are kind of missing information. Let's put it that way. The closest fire station was Engine Company 11, only a mile away on the same road. So they're on Savannah Highway as well. That night, as in so many fire stations, the crew were enjoying a hearty meal, in this case, chicken pot pie. I'm assuming not the little ones that you get in the grocery store for like one person. It's these little sad ones. Sometimes those are really good, but I mean, for a, firehouse full of people who need their strength and their energy, it must have been a much bigger portion. When the call came in, the firefighters abandoned their meal and headed for the Sofa Superstore, possibly with a decided lack of surprise. See, the Sofa Superstore was a bit notorious with local firefighters. We all know at least one place we go to or we pass by on a regular basis that screams fire hazard. For some firefighters in Charleston, that was the Sofa Superstore. In 2006, a team of Charleston firefighters toured the facility in order to plan for a possible fire within the store. Note what sort of fire safety equipment was available, how much water they'd need, etc. As we'll see later on, this particular excursion wasn't nearly as thorough as it could have been. At about 7:10 p.m., Engine 11 arrived at the scene at the rear of the building on Pebble Road, but it soon became apparent that they needed to move, and because that fence was there, they couldn't just drive alongside the building itself. So they had to pull around to Savannah Highway and into the parking lot at the front of the Superstore. And if you see photos of what was going on that night, that's the engine that is sitting right out front. Assistant Fire Chief Larry Garvin took over as incident commander, being the ranking firefighter first on the scene. And within minutes, he and two other firefighters entered the Superstore to assess the situation. This was a dangerous idea since the incident commander was meant to coordinate the disaster response from outside in a safe place where everybody can see you. The whole point of having an incident commander at a situation like this is that every arriving firefighters, like firefighting vehicle, fire trucks, engines, all that, they can see you and they know where to go to get their orders and to know what to do. And here is the current initial incident commander going into the store. Now, he goes into the store like 2 or 3 times. So he goes back and forth at the very least before things start going wrong. In those first moments, everything seemed manageable. The interior of the building gave few indications that there was anything wrong. The lights still worked, nothing was knocked over or fallen. It just looked like a normal furniture store. The only ominous thing was a little bit of smoke at the back of the showroom. Probably nothing major. It really wasn't anything that made anybody think it was going to be anything other than a regular fire. There was a fire near there after all, and a lot of doors through which smoke from that fire could slip through into the showroom. Maybe it was going through the roof area. Obviously, there's, it's a drop ceiling. There's an empty space up there. These are the sort of things that they have to consider when they see that sort of smoke at the back of a building like that. But there wasn't anything that gave Chief Garvin and the firefighters with him any concern that the fire threatened the showroom itself. And as far as they knew as well, everyone was out of the showroom. Everyone's out. They've gotten everyone out of there. And everybody should at this point be out of the building, as far as they know. Outside, firefighters from Engine 10, who'd been grocery shopping close to the superstore when they got news of the fire and got there around the same time as Engine 11. Again, like I said, my sources kind of vary on this, whether or not they got there at the same time, a little bit before or a little bit after, but basically they both arrived at about the same time. So Engine 10 arrives and pulls up alongside the west side of the building where black smoke is rising. They hauled a fire hose back to the loading dock area and began to spray water onto the garbage disposal area. Basically where all those, the broken furniture and everything is piled up, they're spraying onto that, along with the room situated between the back of the west showroom and the front of the warehouse. Fire spread from the garbage to the building itself, accessing the store through the nearest entrance to that spare room. The burning room was one of those transitional areas every warehouse or factory seems to have. It's got a desk or two, some extra product or materials stored in a corner, maybe some pallets piled up, a makeshift break room taking up a small corner of the larger space. We have one like that at my factory where you go to a corner of the factory and there's a storage area behind fence, but there's also a microwave and a picnic table and then another, area where there's stuff stored and then some, product on racks next to it. So it's that kind of an area. It's kind of a catch-all area. This room, which opened out onto the loading dock, also had several doors which led to the holding area and a set of double doors to the west showroom. So they're trying to put this room out and it's not working. Essentially, it's just kind of growing stronger. Assistant Chief Garvin and two of the crew from Engine 11 entered the Sofa Superstore to assess the situation. This wasn't Garvin's first time in the store. It wasn't even his first time that month. About a week earlier, Assistant Chief Garvin arrived at the Sofa Superstore to stock up on furniture for a fire station that had just gone up a 10-minute drive from the store. It was like you would come out, turn right, and kind of circle around an area and end up at this new fire station. So he went over to the Sofa Superstore and started picking up some furniture for the area where the firefighters stay while they're waiting for some sort of emergency to be called in. So if anyone in the fire department had the freshest, the most current knowledge of what the interior of the store looked like, it was Chief Garvin. And I make a point to say the most current knowledge, because it being a furniture store, things are always going to change. The layout's going to change. The furniture that is out is going to change. People are going to buy stuff. It's going to be moved to the back. New shipments are going to come in. They're going to be placed here and there. So things are always going to change. But he would probably have the most current image of what the inside of that store looked like. That said, as the initial incident commander, Garvin should have been outside at a safe distance at a command setup so arriving firefighters would know who to go to, and those who were already there would be able to maintain a steady line of command. So they would be able to talk to him or to talk to their commander would talk to him, and so on. The captain from their engine would talk to him, and that kind of delegation would be going on instead of him doing everything. And this is not going to be a problem that just Assistant Chief Garvin has that day. Instead of doing that, though, he was walking through the store, he's checking the status of the fire, all of that. Garvin moved toward the rear of the west showroom, near where the fire had started, outside by the loading dock. Here, a set of double doors separated that west showroom from the outside. So, I've said it a couple of times already, but there's a couple of doors there. I don't exactly know if they were fire doors because it doesn't exactly describe if they're fire rated doors with, the push bar and everything. But there were two doors back there that opened out into this loading dock, this covered loading dock area. Almost immediately, the fire outside yanked the door from Garvin's grasp. The open door fed a good-sized gulp of fresh oxygen to the fire burning outside, and it dove into the store before anyone could stop it. Garvin tried to close the door, but it was stuck in place. At 7:14 p.m., he radioed out to a fellow firefighter, quote, "I got fire at the rear of the building. It's walking its way on into the showroom," end quote. At this point, Garvin called for firefighters to enter the store with hoses. First a 1.5-inch hose and then a thicker 2.5-inch hose. By this point, ladder 5 had arrived, and several firefighters, including Michael French, Brandon Thompson, and Mark Kelsey, rushed into the building carrying hoses to battle the growing blaze. Other teams arrived soon enough. Engines 16 and 19, a group from Station 15, another group from St. Andrews, which was an area near there, but not exactly in that, like, it didn't cover the superstore, but it was close enough that it could come and assist. All of them sent firefighters into the Sofa Superstore, and in those first few minutes, it seemed as though it would be a relatively simple matter they could handle quickly and efficiently. Around this time, Fire Chief Rusty Thomas arrived with his wife in tow. He didn't just bring her along for fun. Like, Carol, get in the car. We're going to the fire. The two of them had been out for dinner, been enjoying a nice dinner, and then he heard about the fire. So he drove straight there with his wife in the car. He grabs his firefighting gear from the rear of the truck. Other firefighters arrived on the scene from other events as well, specifically from a memorial tournament at a local golf course for a firefighter who'd passed away earlier in the year. Not on the job in a car accident, but still, they were having this memorial golf tournament, so you've got, guys showing up in, khakis and polo shirts, this sort of thing. You have guys who were, they're off duty, they're at home, they hear about this fire, and, they come in a t-shirt and jeans or a jersey and shorts. They're showing up in clothes that they really can't go into the fire for, but the reason that they're showing up is so that they can help with things outside, because they can still do things outside, run engines and bring tools and move hoses and this sort of thing. They can do all that kind of thing, and the people who are actually on duty, who are in the proper attire, can go in and take care of the fire. Chief Thomas, given the chain of command, should have delegated as much as possible to focus on the burning furniture store in front of him, the same as Assistant Fire Chief Garvin. But he was on the radio a lot. A lot. While it's difficult to differentiate voices on the available dispatch audio on YouTube, you can at least pick out certain repeating voices among the scratchy recording. One of those is Captain Thomas barking out commands. And again, he should be more focused on what's going on there. There should be somebody else, kind of like the co-pilot on a plane, handling communications while the pilot actually flies. So it should be very much, especially considering that so many firefighters are arriving on the scene, where somebody else is handling the, radio communications, and he is focused on fighting this fire. Now, we've all walked through our house in the dark at night, half asleep. You don't really care to turn the lights on. You don't want to disturb anyone. I mean, I barely have my lights on as it is. So in the middle of the night, I have to go to the bathroom. I just sort of, I walk through the house, don't turn anything on. I've got, some string lights here or there, and they can, keep it a little nice and not too bright. But there's enough light for me to go to the bathroom or the kitchen to get a drink or something along those lines. We know our homes. We can walk from one end to the other with our eyes closed, discarded toys from the kids and the occasional ominous pile of cat vomit aside. If the power went out, you could still fumble your way to an exit. If the house was on fire, it's an added level of difficulty, but in most cases, it doesn't change the fact that we know our homes and the possible ways of escape. Our childhood homes, our workplaces, bars we frequent, places we go a lot and that we know well, we should be able to know how to escape in an emergency. Firefighters work at a disadvantage almost every time they walk into a burning building. They are almost never walking through like every single one of the homes and businesses under their watch to get to know the layout. They go through a lot of them. Obviously, they went through the Sofa Superstore to assess if it was going to burn, and if it did, what would happen. You know, I'm sure they've gone through their own houses and their friends' houses, but like, you don't go through every single home that you are expected to take care of in the case of a fire. And so there may be things that you come upon that are difficult to navigate. When firefighters walk into a building, it's carrying massive amounts of equipment, a great deal of experience, and usually not much knowledge of what they're going to find inside. I'm going to assume that every single person listening to this has, at some time or another, been inside a furniture store. Your parents needed a new couch, your child is graduating from a crib to a big kid bed, you're buying a house and that dining room is going to need a table that fits 8. Furniture stores set up their displays to look like they would when placed in the room they're going to end up in your home. This is great when you'd like to get some idea of color and size and comfort, kind of what matches what, but maybe not so great when you're trying to navigate through a place with a stroller or a wheelchair. The aisles may not be wide enough, they may wind and turn like a maze instead of being set up in like very specific areas like a grid. The diagrams that I saw of the building itself had some mock-ups of how the furniture was, and in some of the cases those diagrams were very structured and did look like a grid, but from every account that I've heard of what was going on inside that store, I mean, it was very chaotic in terms of the setup and the layout. It wasn't easy to go, okay, well, I'm just going to go this way, or I'm just going to go that way. I can go straight that way and I'll be at the front door. I can go straight that way and I'll go towards the fire. Like, it wasn't laid out like that. You were going to have to navigate furniture that was in your way. The firefighters inside the superstore, when the blaze was tearing through the building, had one advantage: the hoses they carried into the building to put out the flames. In a bad situation where visibility is cut to almost nothing, firefighters could straddle the hose, 1 foot on either side, and follow it out of the building. When they reached one of the points where the hoses were joined together, they knew they were going in the right direction if they followed the direction the quote unquote female side was pointing toward. When you join these hoses together, it's a little bit like when you have a USB and you plug it in. One is, something that you stick in, and the other end is something that the USB is stuck into. So, the thing that gets stuck in is the male part, and then the other part is the female part. Now, on these hoses, the female part is, very easy to recognize, and you can just, okay, that's pointing towards the door. It's going to be pointing, not towards the fire, but away from the fire. The male part points toward the fire. You'd think I would be tripping more over the name of the store than just regular old words. But anyway, one false move, one distraction, though, and they could easily have been separated from the hose they could follow to find their way out of the building. At about 16 minutes into the recording of the first hour of dispatch audio available on YouTube, someone on dispatch says, "Charleston Fire." It's kind of like a greeting, Charleston Fire. Someone else can be heard less clearly responding, "Yeah, I'm trapped inside," and asks for help. The first person asks whereabouts inside the building they are. The man responds that he's in the back. The first person says, quote, "Okay, we'll get you there, buddy. We're coming in there for you right now, okay?" The man begs for help, clearly distraught, and says, "I've got a wife and kids." The first person tells him to stay low and to holler out when the firefighters come into the building. The man says, quote unquote, "Yeah, I've been beating the walls with a hammer." This was not a firefighter. The man stuck inside the building was Jonathan, or Johnny Ray Tyrell III. I've seen Jonathan, I've seen Johnny Ray. It's the South. It's probably Jonathan full name and Johnny Ray, just the thing that everybody calls him. But Tyrell is in the back. He worked there, and when everybody else had left at 6:40, he was still there in the repair room working on whatever it was that he was working on. When the fire started, he didn't really realize it until he went to go try the door, and then he opened it up and there's flames outside. So at that point, he can't get out. The area that he's in, the walls are metal, like, things are starting to get really uncomfortable. He is in a room full of like chemicals and, cleaning solutions and those sorts of things, like stains for staining furniture, like all of this kind of stuff. It's really, toxic and flammable, and it's just probably a really bad place to be in a fire. And he no doubt knew that. Tyrell didn't even realize the place was on fire until, the flames had blocked his only exit. The building wasn't exactly a good place to try and get good cell phone reception either, by the way, not with the metal walls, because, the east and west showrooms also had metal walls, but these little rooms that made up the area between the warehouse and the showroom were all made out of these little, like prefab metal things. And so he's in this little room that doesn't really get good cell phone reception. He finally gets out to 911. And he tries a couple of times, gets the call. He tells them, look, I'm back here. Somebody needs to come get me. After speaking with the 911 dispatcher, Tyrell kept up his banging with a hammer on the walls of the room where he was stuck. It might have been easy to find him under any other circumstances if he did that, but fire responses are noisy and busy. There's sirens blare, hoses blast, radios crackle. If you've ever... if there's ever been like a fire in your neighborhood and you go down to watch what's going on, it's loud. It's just really loud. So a single hammer blow on a wall, no matter how repetitive, could easily be drowned out. By this point, the building was surrounded by multiple fire engines from different departments, including 2 from St. Andrews, which were out back on Pebble Road. St. Andrews firefighters met up with Assistant Chief Garvin outside the area where Tyrell was supposed to be. He was supposed to be in that repair room, and that was on the eastern side of the building between the warehouse and the showroom. They kind of they come together, they listen against the wall, and they hear this banging sound. So now they take out their axes and they start chopping at the exterior wall with those axes until they broke through. When the hole that they made was big enough, Tyrell pushed through and the firefighters hauled him out alive. He was the last employee of the Sofa Superstore to exit the building, albeit in an unconventional way. The thing about fire dispatch recordings is that it can be very difficult to interpret what's being said. I can only assume and hope that it's easier to understand when you're at the scene of a fire. But there are things you can pick up in the recording posted to YouTube. Firefighters yelling, engines stating their position as they hurry to the scene. They're telling you, we're on our way, we're 5 minutes away, we're on this highway, that sort of thing. At one point, 23 minutes and 30 seconds into the recording, someone yells Mayday into the radio. Now, this is a bad sign. If a firefighter at a fire like this is yelling Mayday, they need help. It is bad. This is like a plane, the crew of a plane getting on the radio and saying Mayday. This is bad. Someone says something else, it's hard to hear. The Post and Courier stated it was in reference to telling the man's wife something. And then that person states with really remarkable clarity on the radio, I love you. This is basically like, tell my wife that I love you. And you can hear praying, you can hear like some sobbing, a little bit of moaning. There are times where you hear things and they're wordless, but this is what you're hearing. Shortly after, according to the Post Courier, Chief Thomas yells, quote, everyone stay off the radio, or everybody stay off the radio. The dispatch recording by now has become a mess of loud noises, some of them sounding like words, a lot of them sounding vaguely like wordless cries for help. But there are no calls to verify the location of specific firefighters up to a certain point. No, Thompson, tell us where you are, or Mulkey, report your position. Nobody's saying, this is the captain of ladder 5, where are you? This is the captain of, ladder 10. Which firefighters do I still have in the building? There's none of that going on in the audio recording on YouTube, or at least none that you can really hear clearly, asking for people to report their position. Even Assistant Chief Garvin and Chief Thomas, both of whom should have known who was in there and who was not, are scrambling to establish who is where outside and inside of the store. Soon enough, a dispatcher radioed Thomas, quote, "Car 1, the engineer of Ladder 5's emergency button has been activated." This would be Michael French. When people called for Michael French over the radio, there was no response. In fact, everyone from Ladder 5 was inside the building at the time, its equipment being handled by off-duty folks who'd showed up to help. Now, when they said his emergency button had been triggered, what that meant was he was down and he hadn't gotten back up again. And that sets off an alarm. If you've ever, seen footage of 9/11, after the buildings collapse, there's just constant, like that screeching sound of alarms. And that's a firefighter is down and can't get back up again. And for Michael French, his is the first to go off. It's the first sign that something is really wrong here. By just about 7:30 or so, the situation inside the showroom has drastically gone from bad to so much worse. The firefighters inside were starting to test just how long they could keep going on the oxygen in their tanks. The black smoke clogged the place, making it virtually impossible to see around. It was just pitch black in there. Walking anywhere meant bumping into couches and beds they couldn't even see. Over the radio recording, there are moments where it seems like maybe someone tried to talk but failed. If you use walkie-talkies, there'll be like a beep or a click when you accidentally bump the button, and it kind of sounds a little bit like that. Every once in a while, there's that, like weakly pushing it or trying to and failing, that sort of a thing. There's sounds that may be moans or yelling, like moans of pain, screams, that sort of thing, but it's hard to tell what anybody is really saying. It's not really clear. At about this point, one firefighter can be heard over the radio saying, quote, "lost communication with the hose." Obviously, like I said before, they follow these hoses outside of the fire, so this is bad. That is also a bad sign if they have lost connection with the hose that they're using. Outside the store, firefighters were having multiple problems getting water onto the building at all. One of the biggest problems was that the area around the fire wasn't entirely closed off, with fire hoses attached to hydrants and stretched across Savannah Highway and other nearby roads to reach the superstore. There were even closer hydrants on Pebble Road, but those were cut off from the superstore by a fence behind the building. There was also a hydrant which had been only 100 feet across the highway from the store that had been removed by the water company because cars kept hitting it. So engineers attempting to connect hoses to the water supply, they went to where they expected this hydrant to be because, of course, they had some idea of what was near this particular store, and that hydrant isn't there. So now they need to waste time extending those hoses with other fire hoses to reach hydrants farther away. And that sort of distance does not helpful things with the water pressure. Also, as firefighters fought the blaze, cars kept driving over the hoses, stopping the flow of water in midstream. Police should have immediately cordoned off the area, but they didn't work quickly enough, and the Savannah Highway was still in use. Now, if you're wondering, well, why didn't people see what was going on and just turn off on their own? When you look at this particular area, it's a little difficult to see where they might be able to turn off. There are two roads that are kind of bracketing the Sofa Superstore on either side. They're like to the north. So to the north on the west side is Blitch Ridge Road, and then there's Wapoo Road on the right. But they're across the street, kind of a little bit over. And so it's, if they're not stopping cars from driving over, then it's entirely possible that people just thought, well, if they're not stopping us from driving over, it's fine. And then they just drive over these hoses, which I think would be a warning sign to me, like, oh, okay, maybe I shouldn't be driving this way. Anyway, Another problem that they had was that at the time, Charleston's fire trucks used like thinner hoses than other departments. They weren't as good as other departments, which meant they had less water spraying onto the fire, and even that small amount was being cut off at random intervals because, of course, you've got cars driving over it. On the dispatch recording, a firefighter can be heard complaining, quote, "If we can get these damn cops to stop these guys from running over our supply lines, that's what's killing us." 40 minutes into the YouTube dispatch recording, in one of the few clear moments, what one presumes to be Chief Thomas can be heard contacting the Public Works Department. Quote, "Yes, this is Operator 4, Charleston Fire Department. We've got one hell of a fire on 1807 Savannah Highway, the Sofa Superstore. We need you guys to boost up the pressure on the water off of Wapoo Road area for the engines. They're having a heck of a time keeping pressure." The person he reaches assures Chief Thomas that this will be done. Again, it's probably Chief Thomas, but it's really hard to tell, in terms of, who they're identifying themselves as, that sort of thing. Nobody's saying "Hello, this is Chief Thomas," that kind of thing. But it sounds like the same person who is just barking orders occasionally on the radio. And I'm not trying to demean or insult him or in any way by saying he's barking orders, but he's supposed to be anyway. He's the chief of the fire department, and at a time like this, he can yell all the orders he wants. At 7:35 p.m., the heat and pressure of the spreading fire inside the main showroom as it moved forward shoved some firefighters toward the windows, those front windows. A minute later, firefighters outside vented the front windows, breaking them and allowing firefighters attempting to escape to get out. But the inrush of oxygen also fed the already raging fire. Flames shot forward, blocking the windows and the front doors. The fire poured out of the now empty window frames and upward, blackening the storefront. It's clear from video taken at this point that escaping from the front of the superstore was a lost cause even for the most prepared of firefighters. At 7:38, Captain Thomas got on the radio and ordered everyone out of the building. Someone else blared an air horn on one of the trucks for any of the firefighters still inside who couldn't hear the order over the radio. The intense heat from the fire grew substantially in these final moments, having been cooking the interior of the store for a good half an hour. In some spots, the outer walls of the store were hot enough to glow. If you've ever watched a 9/11 documentary, like I said, when it covers the time during the collapse of the buildings, you know the sound of the alarms firefighters carry, which go off when they go down for too long. Those firefighters still outside the store would probably have heard, if they could hear them, would have heard several of those alarms blaring from inside the store deep within the blaze. With the condition that the firefighters were in, when they were found later on, it's entirely possible that, they were pretty much gone at this point. By 7:51, less than an hour from the first report of the fire, the roof over the main showroom collapsed in a tangle of steel and aluminum. The rooftop sagged in strips like uncooked spaghetti sitting across the top of a pot of boiling water, with the steam slowly cooking the middle part and kind of making it sag and sag until it just collapses. The fire continues, and someone starts to go around and do a head count. Who are you missing? Who's supposed to be with you and isn't? Who got a ride to the hospital for an injury? The list grows bit by bit, one name at a time. The missing can only be in one place. 9 firefighters died in the process of fighting a fire within the Sofa Superstore in Charleston, South Carolina on June 18th, 2007, making the fire the deadliest incident for American firefighters since the events of September 11th. The fire itself continued for hours. Once it was under control at 10 p.m., rescue and recovery operations picked their way through what was left of the store looking for anyone who'd still been inside the building. Over time, the death toll grew. First 2, then 4, then 5, until it was 4 a.m. and the last of the 9 deceased firefighters was removed from the site. Before each one was carried from the scene, his fellow brothers on the force covered him in an American flag and led him out through a double line of firefighters who were, standing vigil for them as they were taken out. like I said, considering the condition that they were under, it was really hard to know which firefighter was which. There is a description in, I believe, the Post and Courier article by Machaca and Smith that is mentions that some of the firefighters, when they were looking at the deceased and they were, being like, well, which firefighter is this? They were just kind of opening their coats, their cover, and looking to see, for a name tag or a label or something along those lines, which they would have somewhere in there. And that's how they were identifying the victims. The youngest of the 9 firefighters was 27-year-old Brandon Thompson, who'd wanted to be a firefighter ever since he was a kid. When he was 14, he started hanging around the local fire stations. That night, he wasn't even supposed to be working. He'd been covering a friend's shift on Ladder 5 rather than on Engine 5 like he normally would have. In a few short months, Thompson was supposed to be getting married, but obviously he was not able to do that. Firefighter Michael French, better known as Frenchie, was a good old boy who enjoyed a good beer and driving Ladder 5, although not together, of course. Firefighter Mark Kelsey, who would work the pumps on Ladder 5, spent his off hours riding the roads around Charleston on his motorcycle and enjoyed poking at the bear a little bit by showing up at dress events for the fire department in a pair of jeans. So, a little bit of a rule breaker there. Then there were the firefighters from Engine 16. Firefighter Melvin Champagne was a veteran of the Army and looked forward to his goal of becoming a pastor. He was also really nicely dressed, to the point where, people would tell him like that, they would tell him that he looked a little, I hate saying this, but they would tell him he looked a little bit like a pimp because he was a little dressed up. Captain Mike Benke enjoyed watching NASCAR in his spare time, presumably with his kids and his family. If I remember correctly, he had 3 kids. Kim Benke would later tell the Post and Courier that her husband would tell her every time they rode past the Sofa Superstore that the place was a death trap. She added, quote, "I didn't know it would be his." Engine 16 had arrived right about the same time as Engine 19, which carried 3 more men who would die in the fire. Captain William Hutchinson, firefighter James Drayton, better known as Earl, and engineer Brad Beatty. Drayton had been a member of the fire department for 32 years, earning him plenty of respect. Hutchinson was the sort of guy who'd chat about how your favorite baseball teams were doing in the standings as he gave you a quick haircut for a couple of bucks. As for Beatty, he was the quieter sort, and he was good with computers. The last of the Charleston 9, as they would come to be known, was Captain Lewis Mulkey from Station 15. The first time I saw a photo of Mulkey, I flinched, because he looks a lot like a guy I went to high school with, who still works down the street from where I live. So I see him like once or twice a week when I'm taking Professor for a walk. He'll come out of his job to run an errand or something along those lines, and I'll see him all the time. So when I first saw that photo, I was just like, oh my gosh, that's Dave. And it wasn't. It's this Captain Mulkey. When Mulkey wasn't fighting fires, he was working as a coach at Somerville High School. Mulkey was popular. He was a good friend. He was a loyal coworker. Everything I read made him sound like everybody's buddy. Everybody liked him. When the other firefighters realized Mulkey was one of the firefighters still inside the burning superstore, they desperately tried in those final moments to break through the walls of the store with their axes to no avail. There were people who actually showed up on the scene because they heard Mulkey was there and was in the store. So, that gives you some idea of just what kind of relationship he had with his fellow firefighters, with the men that he knew, with, all of that. Understandably, nearly 20 firefighters received various types of injuries, burns, smoke inhalation, even a severed thumb, or mostly severed thumb, I think. The way the story is told is the firefighter was in the middle of trying to put out the fire, and he saw blood, and he looked down, and one of his thumbs was kind of hanging by a piece of flesh. So he's like, okay, well, I'm done. And he got out of the store, fortunately. But most stuck around at the superstore until after the fire was out, determined to see each one of their fallen brothers. As night fell, firefighters outside the store continued to search through the burned husk of the store for their brethren. First 2, then 4, then 6, then 9. All of them would be found by 4 in the morning. The fire would be kind of out by 10 or so are in control at least. There were little spot fires that kept popping up over the next couple of days. Given the way businesses along the Savannah Highway bordered so closely with the surrounding neighborhood, it shouldn't be a surprise that at least one house suffered significant damage as well as a result of the fire. Only 12 feet away from the superstore, the home of Ronnie Jenkins took quite the scorching. Jenkins asked if he needed to evacuate during the height of the fire, but he was assured he could stay. Still, his house suffered some significant damage, as I understand it, from the heat generated from the burning store. It didn't sound like his family actually did need to evacuate, but the house itself had some damage. It didn't take long before people around Charleston were making casseroles and baking pies and doing whatever they could to support their firefighters and the families of those who died. Both local and national politicians expressed their grief at the largest loss of firefighting lives in 6 years. On Friday, 150 fire trucks from all over proceeded to go through Charleston, from one fire station to the next, and then onto the site of the ruined furniture store and onward to the memorial service. Now, one of the first parts of the investigation involved analyzing the makeup and contents of the Sofa Superstore. Now, because the main showroom and the two showrooms at either side were constructed at different times, their construction was also different. The main showroom had a front wall made of bricks surrounding those large display windows, and concrete blocks made up the other three walls. But the east and west showroom were prefab numbers made of lightweight steel from the ceiling and supports all the way down to the floor. When the additional showrooms were installed, 8x8 openings were also placed into the concrete block walls of the main showroom to allow the entire place to feel more open. Now, these had those roll up or roll down doors in them, so if there was a fire, they would be closed off. The main showroom of the Sofa Superstore had exactly the sort of ceiling you might expect in such a business at the time. The ceiling consisted of metal trusses concealed from view by drop ceiling tiles, which created a large empty space between the trusses and the tiles. About 5 feet for most of it, although when the roof started getting out over the east and west showroom, there was a slope to the roof, and so on the exterior edges, like the far edges of that roof, over the east and west showroom, it was about 2 feet of space. But over the main showroom, you have 5 feet of space between the top of the roof and those drop ceiling tiles. This gave the fire and the heat a safe, empty space to accumulate, baking the trusses as if in an oven. It's basically a place where the fire can spread and you can't see it. You can't see through drop tiles. So you just kind of have to, move one out of the way or use some sort of thermal imaging camera or something along those lines to see what's going on up there. You go up on the roof and you vent it to get some of the heat out of there, to give it somewhere to go, that sort of thing. That wasn't done, by the way. The roof also consisted of, quote, foam insulation, a rubber membrane, and ballast per the Fire Rescue 1 summary. These sorts of metal truss ceilings were referred to as widowmakers by fire departments for good reason. The contained heat below them in a fire would weaken the trusses, and usually within about 20 minutes, the entire thing would collapse from the strain. You could almost set your watch by it. So from the time the fire entered that empty area between the trusses and the drop ceiling tiles, it was a countdown to just how many firefighters it would take out with it when it went. Obviously, the ceiling was not the only part of the building burning. What are there going to be a lot of in the Sofa Superstore? Sofas, couches, recliners, all the kinds of furniture you'd expect to be filled with foam. Polyurethane foam, to be precise. I can almost hear some of you groaning right now. We've talked before about polyurethane foam in other episodes about building fires. The station nightclub fire is the first one that I thought of. They had the foam on the ceiling, and as the fire burned, it melted that polyurethane foam, and it dropped down onto people and gave them terrible burns on their face and their head and, where their skin was exposed. When It catches fire, it can burn fast, melt hot, drip down onto vulnerable skin, and gives off toxic chemicals like hydrogen cyanide and carbon monoxide. The 9 firefighters inside the Sofa Superstore were surrounded by all types of furniture filled with polyurethane foam, furniture which was tested for flammability in a lot of cases by dropping a lit cigarette onto a mock-up of the finished product. If it sounds simplistic, it's not. Lit cigarettes are just one of the most common ways fires start on upholstered furniture. So that's basically what they were testing it with, was the thing that would usually start it to burn. But this wasn't dozens of pieces of furniture that had lit cigarettes tossed onto them. This was a hungry fire devouring everything in its path, and the heat and flames found that furniture, and the cardboard and plastic some of it would have been wrapped in. I mean, we're talking like fake leather and the foam and all of this fabric and wood that's part of all of this furniture, and it's just finding it all to be this really tasty treat. Assistant Chief Larry Garvin from Engine 11 had been a part of the tour of the Sofa Superstore in 2006, and in charge of making the plan firefighters would need if the store ever caught fire. Pre-plans like the one Garvin was meant to make are supposed to contain all of the details you might expect. A detailed map of the building, entrances and exits, all of the safety gear, where the fire hydrants are and the fire, fire extinguishers, all of that. Any questionable or dangerous areas firefighters might need to be aware of. I mean, I feel like I could give a detailed list, but obviously I'm not a firefighter. I wouldn't be the sort of person who would be able to recognize things that firefighters should be able to recognize, especially somebody who's assistant fire chief. But according to the Post and Courier, Garvin's pre-plan was, well, let's say skimpy. There was a map of the store, but it was a very basic sketch, and no outline of the complicated maze of furniture set up throughout the store, although that no doubt could change from the time he sketched it out. I mean, furniture is movable, and there's not, as far as I know, I didn't see any reference to any sort of fire regulations in regards to a furniture store where you have to keep them all, in a line so that people can just follow an aisle until they get out of the building. They could be all over the place as far as I could tell. Still, it was problematic that the store's setup didn't offer clear pathways from one end of the storeroom to the other for a quick and easy exit, and that Garvin didn't establish as much in his pre-plan. It was a really, incredibly basic pre-plan. When you hear the description of that sketch, and just there was also a couple of contact numbers in there. I wouldn't even think to put contact numbers in there. I'd be too busy going, where are the sprinklers? Where, what in here is burnable? That sort of thing. And instead it was just that very basic description per the Post and Courier article. Then there was the contents of the furniture in the store. Part of the fire department's pre-plans for structures like the Sofa Superstore was an estimate of just how much water would be needed to put out a fire that engulfs the building. Garvin's pre-plan didn't include such an estimate, which would have been extraordinarily helpful, what with the foam within the couches and the recliners and whatnot. I think everybody who listens to this podcast by now knows that if you walk into a place like that, certain things are going to burn. There are things that aren't going to burn, but that sort of stuff is really going to catch fire, and it is going to burn. With all that polyurethane foam, the Charleston Fire Department would have needed far more water to put out any fire in the Sofa Superstore than one might assume for similar structure fires of the same size. Another problem was that Garvin's pre-plan didn't note the drop ceiling and the steel truss system above that which made up the roof. We've talked before about trusses in the episode on the Indiana State Fair stage collapse, although in regards to a temporary structure. The Sofa Superstore, like many other buildings, had a steel truss system permanently installed. But with the roof on top and the drop ceiling below, the trusses created an open area 5 feet in height through which a fire could spread sight unseen. That is a lot of space for that fire to spread where you couldn't tell where it was going. And with a hot enough fire, those sorts of truss systems could fall in only 20 minutes, as mentioned before, leading to them being referred to as widowmakers. If a fire generated enough heat under a steel truss system, the entire thing could collapse as it did in the Sofa Superstore. Now, when Garvin and the firefighters who first accompanied him into the store examined the showroom that first time, they saw no threat. But they could have if they'd had a thermal imaging camera, which could find heat hidden behind walls and ceiling through which the firefighters could not see. Garvin didn't have such a camera, at least not on him. According to the Post and Courier, Engine 11 did have one, and it was sitting back inside the cab while Garvin and his firefighters strolled around the interior of the store looking for the fire. There was also a note in either that article or another article where they mentioned that the St. Andrews Fire Department had one as well. So there was more than one of these thermal imaging cameras floating around, and nobody was using them, apparently. When interviewed later by the Post-Courier, store owner Herb Goldstein was quoted as saying, quote, "Right or wrong, I depended on the fire department to make me aware of any potential problems. Had I known there was a danger, I would have corrected them immediately," end quote. As he argued, the inspection by the fire department for the pre-plan should have warned him of any potential problems, which he could then have had the opportunity to fix. He doesn't have a bad argument there. When the fire department came in, they should have been able to say, "Where's your sprinklers?" There was an issue with the roll down doors because they were supposed to come down automatically when those fusible links were burned through. But 3 out of the 7 did not go down, the 3 for the West showroom. So Garvin and his team, when they came in earlier to go through that store, they should have noticed that that was an issue. And Goldstein had stated that the installers of those doors should also have told him, "Oh, by the way, there may be problems with this." Now, I know what you're thinking, because it's what I was thinking. Do you really need firefighters to tell you need to install sprinklers? According to Goldstein, quote, "No one said this is a dangerous product and you need sprinklers," which sounds a bit naive. The store could have sold stone statues, jewelry, and tools for your garage, all of which aren't likely to burn in a fire, and you would still need sprinklers for all of the other things that keep a business running. All kinds of things, that the paper and the rug and the curtains and like all other things that are in a business. There are always going to be things in a business that burn. It's just the way that it is. There are going to be things. Now you can lessen the amount of that, but it's a little naive to say that you own a furniture store and you own more than one furniture store, I should mention, and you didn't know that the furniture was that dangerous. That seems a little naive to me. Not only is it common sense that those things might burn, OSHA regulations, particularly in the warehouse, probably would have made it very clear that all of this product would be highly dangerous around fire. There's going to be warnings galore on stuff like this that say, watch for fires, don't drop this on it, don't drop that on it, whatever, don't set it on fire, if it's a fire, get away from it, all of that. Like this sort of thing, they're going to give warnings for. There are all kinds of labels and things on items like furniture to tell you this contains polyurethane foam and it is very flammable. Please do not light it on fire, like things like that. Not in that way, but you know what I mean. In response to the fire, Charleston spent about $8 million to improve the fire department. Better hoses, more training, more staff. There was a lot of staffing shortages that were going on at the time. And afterward, the city made a big deal about kind of getting more people trained and in the doors at fire departments around, fire stations around the city. The department also added decals and memorials and other reminders of the fire to their fire stations. So pretty much any fire station that you go into in Charleston, there is some sort of, like a plaque or something along those lines that is dedicated to the memory of the Charleston Nine. To this day, Charleston fire trucks still pay tribute to the Charleston Nine with a list of the names of the dead, some sort of decal on the side, a large decal that'll, honor their memory with their names and, their titles and that sort of thing. The Charleston 9 Memorial Park now occupies the lot where the Sofa Superstore once stood. The land cleared, but the parking lot still visible. In a satellite photo on Apple Maps, the middle of the Memorial Park is shaped like the first swirl in a curving seashell or the start of a Fibonacci spiral. In the center stands a flagpole encircled by benches, and nearby is a memorial plaque explaining the need for the park, what happened at the Superstore, and listing all 9 of the deceased firefighters. At the spot where each firefighter's body was found, a personal plaque lists their name, rank, and station. Just to the west of the Memorial Park at 1835 Savannah Highway is Charleston Fire Department Station 11, which moved over there after the fire. A sidewalk leads directly from the station to the Memorial Garden for any firefighter at the station who wishes to go pay their respects to their fallen brothers. When the sun's high and the weather's nice, visiting the park must be a lovely walk. An open field with green grass surrounding individual memorials, paved walkways, a little pond. It's probably quite peaceful and relaxing, right up until the fire department's alarms ring and the engines disperse, heading off to a fire which one hopes won't quite have the same tragic outcome. So, yeah, this is kind of difficult to do. I think, every week it feels like I talk about how doing this podcast, there are times where I listen to something and I hear it and I need to kind of walk away from the computer. And this time it was when I was listening to the dispatch and the dispatch audio, and I could hear Johnny Tyrell saying, "I've got a wife and kids," because his voice is cracking. This is obviously not a firefighter. Once you realize it's not a firefighter, you're like, oh God, that's even worse, because it something about it being a firefighter and them saying that, I mean, that would be bad enough. But this is somebody who is in that building and it seems like everybody just forgot about him. They didn't know he was back there or something along those lines. It's very confusing, so it's completely understandable that somebody might slip through the cracks. Somebody might be in a room where you're just not looking at them and it's out of sight and out of mind. And in an emergency like that, I mean, I know where I work, we're supposed to kind of have some idea of if we're leading people out of the building in a fire, which I'm supposed to do if there's ever a fire. I volunteered to do it because of this podcast, I think. But it's one of those things where you're supposed to kind of keep a head count of everybody who's in the store at the time. And it's kind of frustrating to hear his voice on there because he's really clearly struggling and in distress. And when he says the part about, I've got a wife and kids, it's just the way that he says it. I was like, okay, putting the computer aside, I'm going to go do something else that's not so stressful. So there was that. It's one of those things that it's just really tough to see things like this happen because there are a lot of criticisms to be had of like the police and things like that. And God knows the fire departments as well can have issues with, sexism and racism. And those are things that, it's not just fire departments. God knows there are plenty of places and workplaces, schools, those sorts of things who have those sorts of issues that they have to confront. But firefighters do such a difficult job. They have to go into these places that are, on fire, that, they don't really know very well. They might have no idea of what is in this building when they walk in there. They don't know how the fire started. They don't know where it's spreading to, what's happening. They're walking in a lot of cases, not knowing exactly what is going on. And I am really impressed by anybody who can do that job. I really am, because, I talk so much on this podcast about how if there is an emergency, you do not have to be a hero. Nobody is expecting you to run into a place, run into a burning building and to rescue someone if that is not your job. But it is their job. It's their job, and they volunteer to do it. They train, and I say volunteer, I mean, some of them are fortunate enough that they're getting paid to do that job. There are plenty of people who do it as volunteer work, and that's amazing. Whether you're getting paid or you're volunteering, it's still an incredibly difficult job, not just in terms of doing it, having the courage to walk into a building like that, and knowing what's inside and the weaknesses of a building that's on fire, that's been on fire, not knowing who you're going to find in there, not knowing if people are going to be alive in there, dead in there, if there are going to be people at all in there. Maybe there's animals that you have to take out who have been burned. Like, I think, people I would expect as a firefighter, and I would be, I think I could be kind of clear-headed about that, but I think if I walked into a burning building and I found, a cat and her kittens in there, being burned by the fire and looking for rescue, I think I would be so upset I wouldn't be able to go back in after I took them out. I don't know why. I think it's more of an expectation of, okay, yeah, there's going to be people in there, but there's a part of me that would not be able to handle if I walked in there and found an animal in distress. I don't know. I can't explain it. It's one of those things that, like, there's so many people who if an animal is hurt, it's harder to deal with than a person. I think there's an expectation in our mind that, a person should be able to get out, and an animal might not be able to because of like a baby gate, or they're in a crate or something along those lines. Like, a person should be able to escape a fire, and if they can't, they're trapped and they need our help. But there are times where, an animal should be able to run out of a fire too, but also, like, we put them in positions sometimes to contain them where, something I'm always afraid of when it comes to if I'm at work and there's a fire and professor is home, I'm always kind of worried that I'm going to get a text or get a call from somebody saying your apartment is burning down. And so I've kind of made a point of trying to get Professor to like my downstairs neighbor. And he doesn't like a lot of people. He's very much not a people dog. He likes dogs more than people. But I keep trying to get him to like my downstairs neighbor, because my downstairs neighbor, I'm not sure if he's retired from helping with our local fire department, but I know that he has, been involved with the fire department at some point and that sort of thing. So I think at one point or another I have said, to Professor in front of him, you have to be nice to John, because John is going to be the one who gets you out of this house if it catches fire and I'm not here. And Professor, when I leave, is not crated. He is fine by himself. He stays out, and he opens the trash sometimes, but that's beside the point. He is relatively a good boy, and he hangs out on the couch and sleeps, or he chews his bones, or, whatever toy that he has, eats his treats, goes to sleep. He's great by himself outside of a crate. But that's the thing. It's such a difficult job. And to have one firefighter die in a fire, while it's not surprising in terms of the danger of the job, sometimes firefighters are going to die in fires because they're going into fires. Like, it's not surprising until it is surprising, until it happens, and then it's almost like, well, you just don't expect it to happen the way that it happened. Like, it's just so hard to comprehend, like, oh, it's so terrible and so tragic that they died in this fire. But that's where they were helping, and they were trying to save people, and they were trying to save any living being that's in the building that they're going into. And for one firefighter, much less 9, to die in a fire is shocking for some reason, even though that's their job and that's what they do on a regular basis. They know the dangers inherent in that position, and, they try as hard as they can to prevent that from happening to them, but also it does happen. And it's not a complete shock. 9 firefighters in one fire, that's awful. That is something that is it's something that feels like you would need to sit down and not get up for a while after hearing it. It would take the wind right out of you. And I mean, it was hard enough, when I was talking about 9/11 and documentaries about it. It's really hard to watch those and know full well that some of the firefighters that you're seeing aren't going to be alive by the end of the documentary. You're not going to see them die, but you kind of are. And it's hard enough afterwards when you're watching it and you can hear those alarms going off. They're high-pitched, they're irritating, they're meant to be found, but they're all over. They're everywhere. And so it's really hard when there's all that sound that's coming at you to locate where they are. In the case of the Sofa Superstore, you had several people who were kind of in the main showroom. And then there were a couple of people in the back where the cubicles were. I think it was Mulkey and Thompson were back there. And then 3 people were in the West showroom. So people were kind of spread out around that area. And so you're talking like open door, open windows. Everybody should be able to hear inside, to hear those alarms going off. And if they could, I mean, that's when the panic sets in. Hearing the Mayday on the radio, that's when the panic sets in. Lost connection with the hose, that's when the panic sets in. That's when you start to get really worried, because now you clearly have firefighters in there that now have to be rescued themselves because they can't get back out again, or they need help. It's so hard to watch the video of what's going on, because despite the fact that you're not seeing what's going on, as the video, as the fire is growing and spreading, and you see more smoke coming up, and you see flames start pouring out of the front of that building, there are 9 firefighters in there, and that there are 9 men in there who cannot get out and may already be dead, and there's nothing you can do. And even for the firefighters outside, there's nothing they can do. Approaching the front of that building at a certain point was impossible. It was so hot. One of the firefighters who was able to get out through the windows in the front after they were broken, the firefighter who helped him out took his hand, I don't know if he was wearing a glove or not, took his hand and pulled him out. And he said, I burned my hand when I grabbed his to pull him out, and kind of looked at his palm. So he got an injury just from touching the other firefighter because he was so hot from the heat in that store. It's just, it's so difficult to imagine it, because you already feel helpless enough watching when it's 18 years old at this point. It is a fire which was devastating. You're watching and people are in there and you can't do anything. And it's hard enough for somebody like me or you or somebody else who, we can't do anything. And there's nothing we can do. Even if the fire was happening right in front of us, there's nothing we could do. But the same went for the firefighters who worked with those people every day, where they were standing 10, 20, 30 feet outside of this fire, trying to put it out. And it was slowly dawning on them that there were firefighters still inside that building, and they could not go in to get them because the fire was too intense. The roof collapsed. They barely had enough water. Like it was just bad all around. And it feels like an impossible situation for a normal person, for somebody who is there and who's having to go through it. and who can do something, but at the same time cannot, it's got to be a million times worse. The one thing that I will say is that you do what you can, and you may be able to go into a fire and rescue people. You may be stuck outside, trying to reach those people who are stuck in there. You may have to wait and help carry them out, and that may be the thing that you do, is to carry them out with dignity and respect, covered in a flag, not visible to cameras or news or anything like that, and being respected and saluted by your fellow firefighters. You may be not on the fire department, so you may be able to help by, feeding them and donating what you can to bring their spirits up, or just giving them a hug and saying, I feel your loss and I am so sorry, and expressing that empathy. It's not a sin to express empathy. It's the thing that makes us human beings, and it is so important to, whatever little thing that you can do, even if it feels futile, go ahead and do it. Even if it's the tiniest thing in the world, even if it is one little spark of defiance, or one little spark of fight, or, one little thing, one little decision that you make, and it's one, it seems insignificant. It may not be. It may be that first domino in an effect that fights back against something like a big fire, or something else entirely. This could be an entire metaphor that I don't really have to nail to the wall. But anyway, I'm going to work hard and see about getting the next episode out. And until next time, stay safe.